What's going on, everyone? Welcome back. With the first round of the 2021 NFL Draft in the books, it's time to talk the biggest winners and losers of the first round, and that's exactly what we will do today. And if you guys enjoy, hit that like button, subscribe. Also, give us a follow on Twitter at AllDayPigskin. And most importantly, let us hear it in the comment section. Did you agree, disagree with these picks? What did you want your favorite team to do? Are you happy with those selections? And what do you want to see in the remaining rounds of the NFL draft? But with that being said, let's get right into it. We kick off our list with one of the top 5 biggest winners in this draft class, in our opinion, and that is the Philadelphia Eagles, who were actually supposed to pick 12th overall, but then traded up with the Dallas Cowboys to select wide receiver Devonta Smith from Alabama. And there's a couple reasons why I love this pick. First and foremost, huge area of need for the Philadelphia Eagles. Offensively, arguably the biggest area of need. In fact, no more Deshaun Jackson, no more Alshon Jeffrey. Jalen Hurts needed weapons. Rieger is a guy that disappointed last season. So Devonta Smith, arguably the second best wide receiver in this draft class, one of those blue chip prospects at the position, is a day one starter, arguably your best wide receiver from the get-go. So I love the fit and I love the value. But arguably the biggest reason why this is a slam dunk for the Eagles and what makes them winners is that they were able to trade up 2 spots. Yes, they give up a 3rd round pick, but at the end of the day, not that big of a price to pay, because the chances that Devonta Smith would have been there after the selection of the New York Giants, who were heavily rumored to be in on Devonta Smith, that's a very low likelihood. And not only do the Eagles get their guy, but more importantly, they prevent the New York Giants from sniping them and getting maybe a generational talent at the wide receiver position. I love this move for the Eagles. I don't think they paid too much. In my opinion, they probably get an A- type of grade for this move. Moving on, we have got the Chicago Bears next, who probably pulled off the biggest trade in the first round when they moved up to the number 11 pick overall and took quarterback Justin Fields from Ohio State. And the fact of the matter that the Bears were all along behind the 8 ball at the quarterback position, just having moved on from one of the biggest busts in NFL history in Mitch Trubisky. And in terms of what they gave up for Justin Fields, a 1st round pick, a 4th round pick, and a 5th round pick, to me, that pretty much boils down to a 1st and a 4th round pick, because when you get to the 5th, 6th rounds, it's kind of throwaway picks. It's taking a chance, something like that. So a 1st and a 4th round pick for a team that everybody and their grandmother knew that they were going to be going quarterback if they could, and the board fell exactly the perfect way for them, because they didn't have to move up into the top 10 to select Justin Fields, who arguably, again, was the 2nd best quarterback in this entire draft class. He's going in a situation that there's good opportunities for success. Yes, the Bears undoubtedly still have to address that offensive line. In fact, with the remaining picks, if they just go offensive line after offensive line, I wouldn't argue with that at all. But defensively, they've got good pieces in place. Wide receiver, they've got Robinson, they've got Mooney, Montgomery is there, you've got Jimmy Graham, you've got Cole Kmet. So it's a good situation for the Chicago Bears. They didn't have to mortgage their future either. You would have thought that, a move of this type of caliber would have maybe required 2 first-round picks or something like that, but only giving up, again, a 1st, a 4th, and a 5th. To me, this is a huge win for the Chicago Bears. Quarterback was their biggest need by far. And just like that, the Bears might have potentially found their answer to the quarterback position, and the best quarterback in their history. That's still to be seen. But again, this is a great situation for Fields and, more importantly, for the Chicago Bears. Next up, we have got the LA Chargers, who are probably my favorite winner in this first round, because they selected Rashawn Slater, offensive lineman. And again, the draft broke perfectly for them. I actually have Rashawn Slater as my top overall offensive lineman in this draft class, ahead of Penei Sewell, because of of the fact that he has great positional flexibility. He can pretty much play 4 positions on the offensive line. And the Chargers continued the process of building up that offensive line, protecting their franchise quarterback in Justin Herbert. They already fortified the center position, now bringing in Rashawn Slater. And the biggest thing here is that they didn't have to trade up. They get a top 10 type of player, arguably a top 5 type of player, elite blue chip offensive line prospect, fall to them at number 13. This must have been one of the fastest selections in the first round. I absolutely love what this does for the long-term stability of the Chargers, for Justin Herbert's protection, for opening up the holes in the rushing attack. This is a foundational type of pick. I love everything about this selection. To me, this earns an A+ grade, no doubt about it. After this, we've got the Minnesota Vikings, who selected offensive lineman Christian Darrisaw with the 23rd pick overall. Now, the Vikings, they were supposed to pick earlier on in the draft, but ultimately moved down with the New York Jets, get some draft capital, and still address the position of need in offensive line that we were all expecting them to do in the early part of the NFL draft. And going Christian Darrisaw, who slipped a little bit in the first round, many people were expecting him to go, 13th, 14th, 15th overall. Again, very good value for the Minnesota Vikings. I love this pick for them. Offensive line was an area of need. This is how the Vikings want to build their identity offensively. You build a good offensive line, you allow Dalvin Cook to do his thing, and then Kirk Cousins can be a game manager afterwards. So to me, this is an excellent selection. I think Christian Darrisaw, arguably the 3rd or the 4th best offensive lineman in this entire draft class. So to me, the Minnesota Vikings get an A grade for this pick. Then finally, we have got the Baltimore Ravens and Rashad Bateman, the selection of the Minnesota wide receiver. I love this pick for the Minnesota Vikings. Bateman was my favorite wide receiver, not named Jamar Chase. The fact that he dropped all the way to number 27 in our previous mock drafts, I had the Baltimore Ravens selecting Rashad Bateman, but in order to do so, I had them moving up via a trade. Here, the fact that Rashad Bateman falls to the Baltimore Ravens, offensively, huge area of needed wide receiver. Don't let the signing of Sammy Watkins fool you. That's not a long-term solution. Rashad Bateman, again, arguably, I think day one is the number 1 wide receiver for that team. A big, physical type of wide receiver, exactly what a passer like Lamar Jackson needs. And again, wide receiver was a huge area of need. Rashad Bateman, someone that was very underrated. As far as fantasy purposes are concerned, if that's what you're looking at this from, look, wide receiver and the Baltimore Ravens maybe won't be the best match, and there might be some struggles, but as far as a team need and a team pairing, this is an absolutely great one. I love this selection for the Baltimore Ravens. Again, they get an A+ type of grade here from me with the pairing of Rashad Bateman. Now, moving on to our biggest losers of the NFL draft, we start with the Carolina Panthers with the 8th pick overall as they selected cornerback J.C. Horn. And don't get me wrong, I love J.C. Horn. I had him as my number 1 cornerback prospect. But what did the Panthers do by selecting Horn? Well, first and foremost, they passed on Rashawn Slater, who, if you believe that Sam Darnold is your quarterback of the future, arguably you want to give him every chance to succeed. You don't want him to face the same issues that he did with the Jets, and that is having a bad offensive line. Well, Rashawn Slater, either the best or the second best offensive lineman in this draft class, you could have had him at number 8, yet you didn't pull the trigger. Then the other thing to consider is if you weren't sold on Sam Darnold, Justin Fields was still available. And maybe it would have been a bad look to pay as much as you did for Sam Darnold and then to only select Justin Fields. But again, you have to go best player available. And the rumors were that the Panthers were considering Justin Fields here. In fact, that he was their second highest graded quarterback in this draft class. And if that's the case, and you yourself call the Sam Darnold signing a gamble, I don't understand how you don't take Justin Fields here. It doesn't make any sense to me. Again, yes, the Panthers got better. Cornerback was an area of need, but you could have also traded back a couple of picks, maybe with the Philadelphia Eagles, and still gotten a Patrick Surtain or something like that, or, a Farley a little bit later on. So again, to me, this was just a good player, but considering what was available for the Carolina Panthers, I have to give this position and this pick a C- type of grade. Next up, we've got the Denver Broncos, and pretty much the exact same situation as were the Carolina Panthers. They decide to go cornerback Patrick Surtain. But again, arguably your biggest position of need, quarterback, Justin Fields was an option here. Yes, the Broncos traded for Teddy Bridgewater, but they only gave up a 6th-round pick for him. That is absolutely nothing. That is a throwaway pick, which means that quarterback should have still been in play. And after spending the entire offseason being linked to Matthew Stafford, to Deshaun Watson, to have a guy like Justin Fields, who is an athletic, dual-threat quarterback with a big arm, similar to Deshaun Watson, fall to you, and you don't have to trade up to get him. This was the perfect scenario for the Denver Broncos. They could have been one of the biggest winners of the first round of the NFL draft. Instead, they select Patrick Surtain after already having a pretty decent secondary. You just signed Kyle Fuller as well. To me, this is a head scratcher. Yes, I like Patrick Surtain, but when you consider the needs for this team and the fact that, they're really one quarterback away from having a very dangerous squad, and that Justin Fields could have been the answer there, again, I think you could argue this is even a worse grade than what the Carolina Panthers did, because this team, again, they have all the pieces in place offensively. To me, this probably gets a C-, D+ type of grade for the Denver Broncos. Afterwards, we have got the Las Vegas Raiders, who selected offensive lineman Alex Leatherwood. And I will go on record saying I don't hate this pick as much as some other people did, because we all knew that the Raiders could potentially go offensive line. In fact, it was a huge area of need after the way free agency fell for them. The biggest issue people have with this pick is that they considered a reach with Alex Leatherwood. But my counter to this would be, at the end of the day, when you're going offensive linemen and the top prospects are off the board, it all comes down to how individual teams have these guys graded. And I do think the Raiders obviously liked Alex Leatherwood, and I'd venture a guess to say that they weren't the only ones that, maybe saw Alex Leatherwood as the next best offensive lineman available. So again, maybe they could have traded back. That's the potential knock here with this selection, especially with how offensive linemen played out afterwards. You still had a Christian Darrisaw on the board. Again, another knock there. But at the end of the day, it was a position of need, so I'm not going to be as harsh on the Las Vegas Raiders. Yes, you could have still taken Christian Darrisaw, who I did have ranked higher. That is my one gripe with this pick. But at the end of the day, I do think this pick probably, worst case scenario, gets a C+ type of grade. Moving on, we have got the New York Giants, and this is an interesting one because the Giants, did trade back, and they did get a future first rounder, a 4th rounder, and a 5th rounder from the Chicago Bears. So they got a great draft haul, but let's not forget they barely missed out on Devonta Smith because the Philadelphia Eagles leapfrogged them, and then they still select a wide receiver, which makes sense, but it being Kadarius Toney is a little bit suspect because Kadarius Toney was one of those wide receivers that a lot of people had in a lot of different ranges from, late first round to middle of the second round. And, a little bit raw in terms of the prospect himself. We had Toney paired with teams like the Kansas City Chiefs, for example, that could afford, being patient with a wide receiver like this and having him come into his own. Now, I'm not saying that Toney is going to be a bust, but when you consider that someone like a Rashad Bateman was also still available, then you start to have some, trepidations with this pick. Also, offensive line You could have addressed that position with someone like a Christian Darrisaw. You could have gone defense with one of those edge rushers as well, because after the top wide receivers were off the board, especially when it comes to Kadarius Toney, I do think there's a separation in those wide receiver tiers. So even though the Giants were winners with their trade, I do think the pick of Kadarius Toney is a little bit questionable. So I kind of have to give this, again, either a C plus type of selection when you combine the fact that they did get the good draft capital from the Bears, but the pick itself is questionable. If thank goodness the Giants did trade back, because if they selected Kadarius Toney with their initial pick, oh boy, this would have been a lot worse. And then finally, we have got the Jacksonville Jaguars, and it's tough to, call the Jaguars losers of the first round because they did get Trevor Lawrence, who is the best quarterback in this draft class, generational quarterback talent, but this is more so nitpicking their second selection of Travis Etienne, because the Jaguars are a team with a lot, and we mean a lot of holes. They were picking first overall, for a reason. And yet you go running back with that second selection. Yes, I understand you pair up Etienne with Lawrence, two Clemson teammates, but you already had James Robinson, who was absolutely sensational last season. And running backs, well, they arguably grow on trees, and you have a much cheaper option at that position. And then your coach comes out and says that Etienne is more so going to be a third down back. That doesn't make sense for a first round selection whatsoever. You could have gone offensive line. You could have gone defensive line, pretty much anywhere on the defense. So for that reason, and the fact that you're selecting a running back in the first round, to me, this gets a very bad grade. The pick itself, if we're only looking at ETN, you could argue this gets a D grade, F type of grade for the Jaguars. But when you pair it up with Trevor Lawrence, it makes it a lot more manageable. But as far as just ETN, I like the player, nothing against him. But again, more so a fact of offensively, this was, really the position that had the best talent by far. So it brings into question this pick, in my opinion, big time. Overall, probably a D grade on Etienne himself. So with that, we wrap up this breakdown of the biggest winners and losers of the first round of the NFL draft. And as always, let us hear it in the comment section. Did you agree, disagree? What do you want your favorite team to do going forward? And if you enjoyed, hit that like button, subscribe. Also, give us a follow on Twitter at AllDayPigskin to continue interacting with us there. But with that being said, we'll see you guys in future videos.